Constantinople. So we got to have the Turks attack. We got big cannons that fire big rocks. And then we should go to Turkey. Pick a little yellow school bus, get to Turkey. What do you think? What do you think? So I got most of your data universe change worksheets. Still got yours in. I got yours. I threw yours away. Just infuriated me. Yeah. And so tomorrow we're going to start the Renaissance, and I'm trying to decide how there's a part 2 of that video series. There's also some notes. I'm just trying to decide how I want to do it. It's kind of easier to do notes when I have at least a few students in. It's kind of weird. If you're sitting at home looking out my window and watching the scrolls go by doing notes. It's just a different thing. So I might show the video and talk about that. I haven't decided yet. But either way, we are going to start the Renaissance then. There'll be some kind of take-homey little test thing, but it will be very basic on the last couple weeks, but it's just going to be very basic. But for next week then, so when you come in on Tuesday, that's when you bring your project. And we'll talk about it, go through them, and same deal then for everyone at home for Thursday. And any extra time, there'll be a couple things we can do, but that's where we'll get going, and that'll be your final score. Normally, we'd have a full unit test or full semester test. We can still do it if you want. Is that a yes? I don't understand the shake your head thing, but this year is so weird. I just thought that was a good idea.
Let's do it.
Semester test?
Yep.
Okay, we got 2 votes for it. Who else? It's unanimous. Remember, it's not those who vote that count. It's those who count. Stalinist democracy. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get Joan of Arc. But we'll come, I love the Renaissance. And one of these days, what I think I'm going to do is any extra time on Thursday and Friday, I'm going to show, not Thursday and Friday, Monday and Tuesday, we'll just show Renaissance on it. Talk a little bit about it, show some of the ways it changed. It's so beautiful, that'd be a good thing to do. It's kind of in that era. I love it. It's not quite my favorite. I'll take a day, I'll show you my favorite, which is Impressionist. That'll be next semester, that's 19th century. Love it. I didn't realize how much I liked art till you see it. And it's like, you see kind of flat pictures like that, then you actually start looking at it and we'll go, we should go, they have a really good art museum in New York City. We could go there. That's a little bit easier. We take the yellow bus. What do you think? All right, so we got the Joan of Arc. Talked about, you remember Henry VI became king, and he was 9 months old, and he had some definite emotional issues. It was kind of crazy because he came from his father, who was the king of France. Joan of Arc, though, convinced Charles that she could help him get back on the throne. I think we got right to hear about Burgundy. Did we get to visions of divine revelation? She said that voices talked to her and told her that it's her divine mission to put Charles VII back or on the crown and to kick the English out. Now, this was not an unusual thing. You think, wow, somebody today would say voices are speaking to me. The odds are you're thinking, okay, we have to go talk to somebody about you. Back then, that gave you credibility. Boy, you must have power if voices are talking to you. Yes, I'm sure people would abuse it. Can you believe that? But this was normal. All these medieval mystics were always talking about this, and they would speak in tongues. And you'll still see elements of that through today. So, as I mentioned before, voices told her. And so, she dressed like a man, acted like a soldier. She was very young when this first started. She was a teenager. But that, in a way, also gave her credibility. A young woman who could do this, rally force in moments of religious fervor, she was also incredibly brave, intelligent. Here's one of this is a picture, this is from 100 years after, but her in armor, fighting, carrying the banner of Charles. And this is a picture from later on, but a feared leader, partially because she just had this mystical aura. And she would fight a number of battles. She wouldn't win. She'd lose over half the battles. But the ones that mattered, she won, especially at Orleans. And there she helped not only lift the siege, but there they used, the French now have powerful cannons to lift the siege of Orleans. Orleans that was taken by or Lyon, that was taken by, it was surrounded by the British, broke the siege, got people freed. I love this one. You can see they would take the boulders and chip them around to fire them. The problem with firing boulders, I think you can imagine, they would hit something really hard and just explode. Iron balls, though, it was still very difficult to do. A lot of times they would break apart into cannon, which would break apart the cannon and be very bad for crew morale, meaning it would explode right there. That's coming. They would get, military would lead to much better metallurgy for cannon. Also, math would come out of this, a lot of math. Interesting time. But by using this, she would become this inspirational leader. And it's important to understand how she gave the French a feeling of self-confidence. We can win. And the beginning of a new idea, nationalism, this love of your country. I mentioned this before. She would give this like, we're French, and that makes it special. This is also dangerous. The idea that we love our country because we're French and therefore we're better than everybody else. If you think you're better than everybody else and superior, it can lead you to do some pretty horrific things. If you think you're on the side of the angels, doesn't that kind of, in a way, give you a free blank check to do whatever you might want? Okay, I did nothing there. I made it worse. And so, here's a couple more pictures. This is Charles on the throne. Here's this is Joan of Arc, or Joan the Maid, in 16th century, drawing a painting of her then. And so because of her power, Charles VII had enough courage to coronate him King of France at Reims. There's a beautiful cathedral there. And they called, when they had the English king on the throne, it the disinheritance. When it was truly, the throne was supposed to be inherited by Charles, but it went to an Englishman. Remember, though, the Englishmen had French roots. Remember, these are Normans who had Viking roots. Reims has an amazing cathedral. Just one of the most beautiful in the world. Chartres, that we saw in the video yesterday, is even more spectacular, but Reims is amazing. And the thing that makes Reims so amazing is that it survived heavy fighting in World War II and World War I. So it's kind of amazing it's still there. But then Paris, still being held by British and British allies, the Burgundians, while attacking Paris, she was captured by the Burgundians and given to the English. And the English looked at her as a real threat. And so what they did is they trumped up charges. I got to repeat, what she was doing was not unusual. Mystics have been doing this for hundreds of years, including England at that moment. But they said because she dressed as a man, the unnatural dress, and of the claim of divine guidance, she must be a heretic and she'd be burned at the stake. And she was only 19 years old when she was burned at the stake.
Mr. Partridge?
Yeah.
So I'm confused. So Henry V, the baby.
Henry VI.
Okay. So he was crowned King of England and France.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about, Joan of Arc and Charles VII, they were retaking France from that ruling, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure I had that right.
And yeah, there's a lot of, yeah. And so we're kind of talking about debates amongst royal families. And this is a from the 15th century of her being burnt at the stake. And burned as a heretic, but she would really become a symbol and of French resistance. And you'll see her as resistance, not only here, they bring her back during the French Revolution, when everybody in Europe attacked France. Napoleon would bring her. When in World War I, she became a symbol of French resistance against Germany and a symbol of the resistance against Nazi Germany's rule in World War II. And so eventually in the 20th century, she would be sainted. Made a saint. It's a political action, but dictated by the Catholic Church. And you see her in the more modern time as a symbol of women's rights and feminism. And so one of the things about Joan of Arc, especially since she died so young, is people can take her as a symbol for so many different things. You'll see that a lot in history. People will take parts they like in her, even though the women's rights thing, she dressed like a man, so there's a little concept, wait a second. But she is still a symbol also of a woman taking charge. It's like there's no easy answers there. But here's a couple, like I love these ones. Here is Britain in World War I using Joan of Arc as a symbol, and the U.S. doing it in World War I. Go liberate France, because she saved France, now it's our turn.
That kind of seems inappropriate for Britain to do that. Given that they killed her.
That's actually a really good point. But you'll find out something in politics. There's no such thing as hypocrisy. People just do stuff and then move on. No, you'll find out that some of the most successful politicians in history have no shame, which is also disgusting. But they just have no shame. They'll just do whatever. Pay attention right now. Okay, moving on. So the war finally ended. Britain is absolutely exhausted. I mean, this was such a titanic struggle. It's a great story. I've read a couple books about this, but one of my favorites is a book by Barbara Tuchman called The Distant Mirror. Just an amazing saga. But, so we have Joan up in the war. So she helped turn the tide for the French, but the English exhausted. Scotland, which had won their independence, was a thorn in their back the whole time. And even though England defeated Scotland in a couple battles, they always had this threat of France helping Scotland attack England. And then in 1453, a British force foolishly attacked a French force in the middle of France, right about here, west of Paris. They attacked a larger French force and were routed. And that was basically it. The French, the war was over. This is the Battle of Castillon, and I like this picture. You can see crossbowmen, you see cannon, men at arms with the sword, earthquakes happening, pikemen. It's just a good, it kind of shows a lot. But that's from a little bit after. So the war ended, but technically, I should have put the war down. I meant to say the treaty would not be signed for 20 more years. I'm sorry about that. The treaty would not be signed for 20 more years. So the fighting ended. This is one of the problems when I'm kind of typing and thinking about other stuff. But the fighting ended. 20 years later, the treaty would be signed. So basically, the war would not end until 1483. And the results. So France would be unified. So this map right here, you can see Britain had chunks in green of France. Look by 1429, when Joan was reconquering. Look at all this area in green, where either French or the Burgundians were French allies, because they wanted to put a Burgundian king. If you go to France now, this area is Burgundy. And they don't know if that's a food and wine or things just for that region. But then look at France after the war. What we think of France today, that's really where it came about here. These guys were a vassal. Most of this would go into France. This would be Belgium and the Netherlands eventually down the road. But France would be created. This was the country of the French. So they won. The English only kept this little place right here called Calais, which is 19 miles from the shore. And they would eventually lose it in the 16th century. So Britain went from having almost half of France, and the richest areas of France, to just that. So this is a pretty humiliating defeat for the English. And this is also the beginning of more modern nation states. We saw this out of the plague, too. The plague devastated the old feudal system. The 100 Years' War devastated the feudal system, too. Who died at Agincourt? Who died at Crécy? It was all those knights. They're the ones that are being crushed. And who remained in power? The king. Even though the French king lost, they had more power. And so the beginnings of modern states. So we see borders here, and they're pretty vague. It's not like a set border. But by the end of the 100 Years' War, this is becoming a border of what we think of as a nation state. We think of borders today as being created just at this time. It's no coincidence that the Renaissance is beginning at this time right here in Italy. This revolution in thought. They called it rebirth, but in reality, it's just a change in the markets, exploration, and of course the biggie, painting. Okay, and warfare would ever change. It went from relatively disorganized knights attacking, incredibly brutal and effective warriors, but individual warriors, into more and more trained armies. You couldn't just have men march to battle with whatever weapon they have. Training and tactics advanced dramatically for the first time since the Roman Empire collapsed, at least in the West. And you'll just see it here, where all through the 16th century, fighting would develop more and more, and then the most horrible thing to happen to Europe since the plague, the 30 Years' War, is coming, where fighting will become an art form. But that leads us to another war in England. And you'll notice the years. It's no coincidence. This will be a civil war in England that will go from when England lost, basically. Why would the treaty be signed? The civil war in England ended. That's why they ended the war here. So this is a civil war in England. And the War of the Roses will have great effect on the attitudes of England towards the king. And it's basically two elements. And by the way, the symbol for the two noble families that will be fighting were red and white roses. Thus, the War of the Roses. So the House of Lancaster and the House of York, they would fight this war. And so just to review, so we just mentioned, I know I was kind of putting things together, but war had devastated England. The king there in the short run was weakened. Partially weakened because nobles were furious that they're being taxed. Nobles, remember, they revolted and got King John to sign the Magna Carta, which said that nobility has the right at least to approve yes or no of their taxes. Well, because of the war, the king kept raising the taxes. And so there's a war. By the way, this just shows here in red, controlled by the Lancaster, and the blue and white, controlled by the House of York. So, war is over, humiliated, disruption. Henry VI, as we mentioned before, became king at 9 months old. There's him as a young man. Here's a picture of him as a baby being crowned king of England. He's literally 9 months old. And don't forget what I told you. Just getting to 1 was the big deal for children. And so he's still at the most dangerous age. But he made it. And he also became king of France, but he's still king. But in 1453, at the same time as the Battle of Constantinople, he went completely insane. 2 years. They basically had to lock him away. He babbled incoherently, would sing, would attack people. He'd gone insane. Now, we don't know exactly why today. It could have been lots of things. He probably had something inherited from his father or his grandfather, Charles VI, and they're all eating moldy bread and things like that, so he could have been just hallucinating. Who knows? But Richard Plantagenet, the Duke of York, right here, essentially became his regent. There was a conflict where I'm skipping it. There's a big fight between the two different houses. He was Henry of the Lancaster, but the noblemen wanted wanted Richard because they saw him as more stable. Basically, it was a fight. A lot of people thought the Lancasters were getting too powerful. And so he's his advisor. And this infuriated the Lancasters, as they saw we are being pushed out of power. And this little boy, who is now a young adult, is king, yet he's quite crazy, and all the power goes to the York. And so they would trigger a civil war. And the war is going to rage back and forth. I mean, if you read a history of the War of the Roses, it's one of the most complex things I've ever seen. And we're not going to go through all the details of it. It's a fascinating thing because it has direct effect. One of the reasons I'm talking about this is because it has direct effect on us in the United States. because this will greatly affect how England, the beginnings of the 16th century, when they would explore and eventually have colonies, will be greatly affected by this. You know, we have taxes, anger over that. One thing I should add, the Lancasters, they were fearing, okay, now they're going to get us with big taxes. They're going to steal our money. And so, a couple things about the war then really quick. And then Richard was able to get Henry to say that Richard's son would be king, make him heir. So that's where the Lancasters just went nuts. You're going to give Henry or the York power by making Edward king. So Richard was quite the dealer, quite the wheeler dealer. And so at first, there was a series, the battle raged back and forth between the Lancasters and the Yorks. But finally there was a Yorkist victory. Edward now, as a young man, Richard's son, Richard would die during this time. Edward the York of the House of York, so Edward Duke of York, would win at the Battle of Towton. Now, this shows England during the time of the battle. All these X's are the various battles. And so obviously we're not going to go through all the battles. Towton's up here. There are battles everywhere. There's no set piece. They're just Allied armies would fight, then they kind of go home, they fight someplace else. It was really confusing. That's Edward right here. So, Edward, Henry VI, was removed from power and then just kind of gone. At the Battle of Towton, Henry was babbling and singing songs, and they just abdicated him away. They just kind of pushed him aside. He had completely lost his mind. And so Edward IV would become king. And I didn't put the year down, but this is 1463. Edward becomes king. And Edward was a brutal king. Executed virtually every Lancastrian he could find. Set up secret courts to arrest people for treason. He spied on people, had a secret, what we call a secret police today. Gouged allies of the Lancastrians for money and taxes. So he was a brutal, dictatorial leader. An incredibly cruel man. Incredibly cruel man for taxes. But
this
then,
is Richard's son, right?
Huh? Yeah. Henry.
Richard's son, right?
Richard Plantagenet's son.
Yeah.
And so, because of that, the Civil War would remove. But the Lancasters attacked, and they were devastated at two different battles over the tax. I mean, just destroyed. Edward looked like the great victor. The Lancasters counterattacked. This is a picture of the Battle of Tewkesbury. And even though they show only knights, it was mostly foot soldiers. These are bloody, awful things. The Lancasters are done. But then Edward died suddenly in 1483. Literally just died, boom, dead. No one expected this. Nobody expected this. And his young son, Edward V, would be king for about 2 months. Edward's brother, the regent, so the man who would be Edward's son, or Edward's uncle, Edward IV's brother, Richard of Gloucester, was a regent. And he decided that he's going to have his nephew sign away the crown to him. He made himself King Richard III, and he put Edward and Edward's younger brother Richard, so these are Edward IV's kids, so he was king for about 3 months. Richard the regent removed his young son and put him in jail. Here's a painting, one of the more famous ones, of them in jail. the nephews in jail, and they mysteriously died while being in the Tower of London. Meaning Richard had his nephews killed so he could make himself king. And that broke up any support for the Yorkists. And war began again. Here's Richard III right here. Richard had a curved spine, and he's always shown, he was considered to be a hunchback. And there's sort of stories about this, about Richard with this kind of curved back. One of the most famous Shakespearean plays was Richard III, where Richard is like the most villainous, evil person ever. But he probably was pretty evil. We think he probably killed his nephews. We're not 100% sure. But they always have him portrayed as this, like this hunchback with gnarly fingers. It's infamous for actors who are good for overacting to play Richard III. But at the Battle of Bosworth Field, Lancaster won. Henry Tudor, who was a Lancaster, that's why I put land here, would lead not only Lancasters coming back, some came back from Ireland, some came back from France. They won the battle at Bosworth Field, right here. Richard's army was defeated. They reenact this every year. So here are pikemen reenacting it, and they have halberds. You see the halberd right there? It's got a pike and spear in front, and then this is to hook their enemy, or to hook horse legs. So if cavalry goes by, they could hook the leg. So hamstring. Yeah, it's awful. It's terrible. But Richard would die. Richard's body, he'd be buried after the war, and Henry would become king. And it's one of the great mysteries about Richard. Was he really a hunchback? Did he have a curved spine? Well, here's Richard. There's him body after he killed, and Henry would become leader. There's a painting of Richard done after the fact. In 2012, in the parking lot of a drugstore in Bosworth, they found the body. They were redoing the parking lot, and they found a body, and it was Richard. And you see it? Look at the spine. When they call him a hunchback, he must have been like this. And that had to hurt. And think about every step, how much that hurt. So they found Richard III's bones. And I remember this happened, this was like, wow, they found Richard III's bones. And now I guess they're in the British Museum in London. And I want to go, I've been to the British Museum, it's amazing. But I want to go there now to just see the bones. I know we look at the picture, but it's a lot cooler when you actually see him in person. But now we have Henry VII. And this would begin the Tudor dynasty. I heard a voice, yes.
Can you imagine being that construction worker?
No kidding.
Wouldn't that be so weird? Just, what the heck?
And I guarantee you the company that was doing it was furious. Because that means they have to stop construction completely.
Oh, yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, just imagine finding, I bet the first thing they thought was, I've uncovered a murder. Somebody was buried here last year. So this begins the Tudor dynasty. And Henry VII's son would be one of the most famous kings of England. Luckily called Henry VIII. And we'll talk about Henry VIII next school year, next semester. But he married a York, Elizabeth, so they could unify the family and brought the English crown together. And this would be the beginnings of the Tudor dynasty. And out of this, you have this uneasy feeling that the nobility still have some power to control taxes. Parliament would gain strength, and we're coming to modern England with a direct effect on the United States. Here is Henry VII being crowned, and they're showing him personally killing Richard III. He did not do that. Richard III just died in the battle, but they always show the king doing it. But they also set up a system, because remember I told you that Edward set up like a secret court system and was arresting people? And it was originally called the Star Chamber. And the Star Chamber was going to be a just court system that people would go to trial and receive a fair trial. But you notice I put down, anybody want to guess what happened to the Star Chamber? This court system that was said to be a just court system, within 50 years will be symbolic of a secret tribunal that would arrest people, would take people without charges and judge them life or death all in secret. People would just disappear. And this would become the symbol of one of the most tyrannical courts in the world. Kind of amazing how it first starts out. This will be our just courts, honest and forefront. We'll see this time after time in history. And so with that, that's a good picture. Got to talk a little bit about the Pope. While this is going on, and I mentioned this in the 100 Years' War and the Plague, we have what's called the Babylonian captivity, 1309 to 1377. By the way, I'm going to do a few notes. I'll finish up whatever I don't finish up today, and then we'll watch a video tomorrow. I will start the video, finish it on Thursday. Friday, Renaissance art. I might change my mind. So, 1305, just a little backtrack here. Pope Benedict XIII. Now, he had been fighting with the Holy Roman Empire in France over the power, basically who could pick kings and queens and money. He would issue an edict, a papal bull called the Unum Sanctum. And the Unum Sanctum said that the Pope and the church is supreme. The church is supreme, not some king. Now, this is not new. Innocent had done this to the Holy Roman Empire 100 years earlier. The Pope is supreme. The problem is this. France, before the 100 Years' War, kind of sowing their oats, they proved their power by picking their own Pope, Clement V, and said, no, you're not supreme. We have an army, we have the money, we have the power. They wanted to tax the church. There's a lot of wealth. The church has a lot of wealth. And Pope Clement V was chosen by the French, and they moved him to the town of Avion, France. They moved the papacy. And for the next 70 years, there'll be 7 popes, not in Rome, but in Avion. Avion is right here, on the Rhone River, right here. So when the plague hit, the Pope wasn't in Rome. The Pope was in Avion. And that's why they call it the Babylonian captivity. It's implication of when the Babylonians enslaved the Hebrews, which is in the Torah or the Old Testament, but it's that the Pope was now prisoner to the King of France. And this is going to cause a massive crisis. There's Clement basically begging forgiveness from King Charles of France. And so with that, and then in 1378, especially the Holy Roman Empire, but other places decided, no, we want our own Pope. And so for 30 years, there's going to be 2 popes. One in Rome, one in Avion. 2 popes. Both fighting for each other. That's the Grand Schism. And so what we're getting here is there's a lot of crisis within the Catholic Church. 2 popes. And then, as luck would have it, in 1417, they decided we need to pick a legitimate pope. And so they kicked, in Rome, they said, the cardinals in the Vatican said, no, the other 2 popes are now resigned, and we'll pick a 3rd pope. Well, the other 2 popes didn't resign. And for a while, there were 3 popes. And, okay, all of this is not as important as to understand that the church is going through what's called a crisis. And that would leave eventually what's called the conciliar movement. And the conciliar movement is this. What they decided is we need a series of church reforms, which in reality did not reform the church at all. But what did they do? They picked 1 pope. Gregory II and the other 3 popes finally resigned. Now you might think, oh God, we're 2 popes, what does that matter? Well, the church now is humiliated. The church is weakened. The church lost power. They lost power because of the war. Kings are gaining power. And so they're desperate to show their grandeur. They never quite recover. And the one way they will recover to show the power of the church, they're going to begin a massive building spree. Money. This is a picture of Gregory being restored to Rome. Now, the Vatican, St. Peter's Cathedral in the Vatican City, will be made after this. The chapel that was built right before was called the Sistine Chapel. That would be built, and then maybe one of the greatest works of art of the Renaissance, Michelangelo, would paint the ceiling. And we'll see that coming up. But that would be built here, and it's about money. And so with that, this is Avion. And you go to Avion, they built this massive palace for the Pope. And it is the starkest grand palace because they built, and imagine it covered with, it was painted, and it was covered with gold and tapestry, and all this money in it. And then when the captivity ended, they took all of it out. So you have this big empty building. It's massive, and it's just nothing there. But my favorite part is it's right next to this bridge right here that just goes out about halfway and stops. And there's a wind in southern France called the Mistral. And they have this really heavy wind that blows from the north. It's about 30 to 40 mile per hour winds. And sometimes it's gusts up to 90 miles per hour. And it just blows constantly for 3 days straight. The Mistral is 3 days. And I took these pictures during the Mistral. The wind was blowing so hard, I just about got knocked off this bridge into the river. When those gusts hit, and it was wind, so you're kind of fighting against the wind, and the wind it was blowing as hard as that, and then all of a sudden the wind slowed down a little bit, and I was trying so hard to brace myself that I just about kept falling in. And I might not be here now. That's a fast-moving river. But I'm gonna stop right there. I didn't quite get as far as I wanted, so I'll finish this tomorrow. Is that good? And so the plan is we'll start the Renaissance. We are going to watch that video. So tomorrow I'll probably do this. Then I'll probably record this one after this class tomorrow. Any questions on the project? We going okay? We're getting it done? Are you working on it? Oh yeah, we're doing it. Ooh, what's that project again? It's worth 484,000 book points. And not only that, it will count towards your other classes. So if you don't turn me in a good one here, I'll go to your English teacher and say, look at this. But you do well. You tell your English teacher, and they'll say, did you get it? You don't have to take the final. Just don't even show it. Just trust me. I said it. Mr. Larson. Mr. Larson and Mr. Mihalish told you that. It's perfectly fine. And you're doing again what? Coat of arms, and you're doing again? Awesome. And medicine. Awesome. So you're going to cure anybody?
I don't know.
See, the thing about amputating somebody, you got to be fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you how to amputate. See what you do. All right, on that happy note, I'll see everyone tomorrow.
Mr. Partridge,
Jawohl.
are there specific things you want in my paragraph about the Tower of London?
Just give, all I want is when it was built and what it was used for. That's it.
Okay, sounds good. And the structures, if I can't find a couple of them, is that okay?
It's fine.
Okay.
I know it's not going to be perfect. You sent me that picture. It looks really, it's very well done.
Okay, thanks.
And Aaron, he might have had scoliosis. We're not 100% sure. Oh, I'll tell Aaron next period. She moved to the next class. She's a special class. All right, everybody, goodbye.
Oh, hey, Mr. Partridge, I forgot to tell you. They found out that I'm colorblind. I had no idea. That the diagnosis came totally out of the purple.
I knew it was coming.
Leave my presence.
Okay, bye.